Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran holding out on the reunion tour for a bigger cut of the merchandise, or else a scrappy upstart, holding out on playing the local open mic until they guarantee you a free Sprite, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the first Friday of March 2023, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Caden who drove a GMC Savannah with small tube televisions in the back seat from 1997, and who was always trying to sell you katana blades that he claimed were embargoed by the ATF. And old Caden would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. This year, Bandzoogle would like to congratulate its members on surpassing $100 million in commission-free sales. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, you can check out my tour page, joepugmusic.com/tour, where there are a bevy of new tour dates posted all around the world, from Seattle to Annapolis, Maryland. Or you can find me the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners of this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern. Head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you can become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, or you search for my name or the Working Songwriter name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the capital to support the show in that way. If you are not in a place to support the show in that way, you can still help us out in a couple ways that are entirely free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I'm really glad that you're here this week. I appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Cory. Our Our guest this week hails from Mississippi, where he was weaned on the gospel music his father was partial to. Cory Branan moved to Memphis in his 20s, where he began playing open mics with songs that had been inspired by the troubadour model of John Prine. He has built a grassroots following across the nation, and now, 2 decades later, he still remains a celebrated mainstay in the singer-songwriter world. He's collaborated with Jason Isbell, Garrison Starr, Craig Finn, and Brian Fallon of the Gaslight Anthem. He's recorded for Bloodshot and Blue Elan Records. He's appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman. He's toured with Dashboard Confessional, Frank Turner, Justin Townes Earle, Tim Barry, and many others. American Songwriter has praised his hushed, dry whiskey voice and his sharp-edged story song lyrics. Pitchfork said of his album Adios that it is possibly his best album to date and certainly his most musically imaginative and arguably his wisest. I got a chance to catch up with Cory on the phone a few weeks ago to hear about his musical journey so far. Cory Branan, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter. You're definitely a working songwriter, the kind of guy that this show was like designed for, in my opinion, when I started it 5 or 6 years ago. You grew up outside of Memphis in North Mississippi in the cradle of a lot of really important American music. How aware of that were you growing up, or were you just listening to music that was just kind of more generally available in like kind of mass American culture at that time?
Yeah, it was a mix. I mean, I was oblivious to how lucky I was growing up, there. And so a lot of the root stuff, it seeps in just because my family, my father he was a drummer, but his old man was a fiddle player. His old man's old man was a fiddle player, and everybody, in the family sang, and, music comes in through the church. And so you see, I get it a little bit, but I was a little hood rat glued to MTV as it was coming out, and so I was just getting everything piecemeal. I was into metal. I was into like disgusting hardcore rap, like just the filthier you could find. It was whatever I could get, and so yeah, and it was a good time to grow up. I didn't talk about it before, but I mean, even like the pop radio, it's like put on a Billboard Top 100 from 1983 to 84, 85, and try to find 2 artists that sound alike. Everybody was making so much money, and I know that's the reason it was happening, that labels were signing, and really developing the most diverse acts, and then you had and they weren't letting the old guard die either. You had Tina coming back and having hits, and so you had this sort of I just watched this clip of the We Are the World or whatever rehearsals or whatever, and I was just looking, I was like, jeez, just look at this room. And I look at this room of insane, completely idiosyncratic different artists, and I was just like, man, I was like, yeah, anyway. But so yeah, I was lucky enough to grow up, I Purple Rain, all this stuff hit me. I was 10 in 84.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, all this stuff, Van Halen's 1984 and Thriller, these things dropped out of the sky, and I was just like, what is this? But yeah, no, but I also grew up, yes, inundated with some roots music here and there. It wasn't until later that I got into a lot of the North Mississippi, sort of the trance blues and stuff. From RL and Junior Kimbrough and all that stuff. And really, I really started appreciating being from where I'm from,
It's a pretty astute observation that I haven't heard before on the show, but that I like a lot, which it was in the 80s, like they were so flooded with money in the music business that you really could just like let it rip on pretty idiosyncratic artists, because it's like, well, I'm going to sign 100 idiosyncratic artists, and 3 of them are going to break and make me $25 million in the space of 12 months. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it was a special time in that way. And they could also spend time developing them, as you said.
Yep. And even radio, radio was, it was still, even though it was a big money thing by then, it was coordinated. It was still pretty wide open. You would hear supersonic, and then ZZ Top coming out of the same station, man. It was, I mean, like, it was crazy. And it would be like, it would be the Cars, and then it would be, I don't know, it's whatever, but it was all over the place, and it was coming out of the same station, and it was just, there was still a hub, a way to reach massive people with different things, and now obviously that MTV played a large part of that, but.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a good time.
It was. It was a good time, I think, especially for the winners. I think it's, now that media has been splintered, I think it's a good thing for, frankly, dudes like me and you, because we can take a perch in the music business that we maybe wouldn't have been able to take 40 years ago. But, I think it has kind of hurt those acts on the bigger end who, I mean, I don't even know who at this point you could say is just universally known and universally beloved, but besides like maybe Bieber, maybe Beyonce, Taylor Swift, maybe Billie Eilish.
Right up top.
Yeah,
That's
but
it's
it's
right
the
up
very
top.
Once you're out of the top 10, I mean, it goes down really quick,
It starts getting a little niche. And and I was thinking that I kept waiting for the sort of sea change that would happen to where artists like Billie Eilish would come out, but you have this on paper, this sort of the idea that you can have a massive audience, reach a massive audience with something by putting it on a digital thing and having everybody have access to it. It's like saying, "Oh yeah, I poured a glass of water in the middle of the ocean. Go try and find that." But it does the promise of something like that is that maybe an idiosyncratic artist can develop their own thing and get to a place where the big money can come in and pick them up or whatever. But I was thinking we would have more interesting artists, since the labels weren't exactly calling the shots anymore, and you didn't have suits develop as the same. I was thinking more artists like Billie Eilish would sort of come out and out of nowhere, out of the woodwork, But I think she's a bit of an anomaly. I don't see it happening too much where someone interesting is coming and getting to a certain pop level.
You see a ton of interesting people getting to like the theater level, like the 3,000 to 5,000 people in a theater or something like that. But you just don't see a lot of idiosyncratic people like really getting to, playing stadiums and stuff like that.
That's the thing. And for me, it's just interesting as a, just as a music fan. I just, I like to see, it doesn't apply to me,
Right.
Yeah.
But as a fan, it actually does, because I think what you're speaking to there is, as a listener of music in the 80s and the 90s, not really in the 2000s at all, but in the 80s and the 90s, there would be certain cultural events that no matter what your proclivity was for the type of music that you liked, everyone kind of shared them. Like we all saw the Michael Jackson video, It Don't Matter If You're Black or White, happen like after the Super Bowl. Like we all, if you're a certain age, you watched it because it happened right after the Super Bowl. And there just aren't cultural touchstones like that anymore that really span the entire populace anymore.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think I heard it said best with who was it? Used to do the Bloomsbury cartoons.
Doonesbury, Gary Trudeau.
Yeah, I guess so. My brain's just not working this early, but he was talking about how there's, he's like basically he was talking about it from the aspect of the cartoons and the Sunday comics or whatever. And he was like, but he was saying basically there will be no more Elvises, because there's no massive pipeline to reach the people. And he would talk about how when he was lucky enough to have, before everything splintered into, digital pixels, he came up in a golden age of sort of comics and Sunday comics, because, back in the day you had your little comics here or whatever way back. And then there was an era when you would have 7 pages. Some people would have like full page like comics in the Sunday comics, and there was still a way to reach people because people bought the Sunday paper, and it was syndicated, whatever, and it was everywhere. And it's talking about now that everything's spread around the world, which is on paper very democratic and very access to the world, but it's spread in the thinnest layer of pixels you could imagine. Yes. And he's like, there's no way to reach people. anymore. He's like, that was the first thing to go around any newspapers before the newspapers themselves went. The art, the comics were the first things to get ripped, and so it went back down to hardly anything. And then, so yeah, I mean, it's we're not a culture that valued sees art as a necessity in general.
Yeah.
Any capitalist culture is not going to do that. It's a commodity. And so if you can't make money off of it, then it's not going to be, suits don't care. So it's the first thing to go,
Yeah. Although, I mean, the funny part is though, like it is, people do acknowledge that it's a necessity because everybody, even in hard times, is still consuming music and art always. Now,
oh, absolutely.
Whether that money gets to the people who are making it or not, well, that's an entirely different conversation. But, consumers themselves, at no point does anyone say like, well, I'm working too much and listening to music doesn't help me make any more money, so I'm not going to listen anymore. Like people are still.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The person that, not how people use music. I'm just talking about how the whole structure set up.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of an interesting dichotomy that you have that, you're listening to this mainstream MTV stuff. You're listening to what you called, some version of, like really hardcore rap. And then you have this more traditional thing that's happening in your family's church, which you say you now appreciate. What did it feel like to you at the time? Did it feel like a fossil of some kind? Was it something that you kind of liked? Was it something that you were dead set against? Like, how did you interact with your family's relationship with music?
Yeah, I kind of went when I was a teenager and I started playing guitar. Because they tried to get me to play instruments earlier. There was the piano recitals and all that. I hated that shit. But eventually, I guess I was 13 and, I was like, oh, okay, I want to play some metal. And I sat in a room and learned how to shred one summer. That's all I did. And, so yeah, I went as far away from anything roots as I could. I didn't appreciate what an effect it had, but when I was younger, before that, I liked the music in the church for the most part. Some of the hymn stuff, was a little bit like this, but when we would have like revival kind of stuff, when the music got loose and more gospelly, and there was especially the harmony stuff. My old man used to listen to like Blackwood Brothers and a lot of the four-part Southern gospel harmony. That it just to this day, harmony, like certain kinds of harmony, really pull my ear and interest me. And so that took a hold, I think. And then I've always said it wasn't until much later that I realized how much growing up in the church that was relatively fundamental in the old sense of the word, fundamental, to where they didn't have a lot of politics. I mean, they would read from the Bible, and there was a lot of reading. And so half the sermon was just reciting. And so it's the only poetry I was really exposed to as a kid. And the cadences of the King James Bible, the parallelism and the way certain, a word is repeated until it builds up and has its own strength over a few lines. Those sort of things, I think it really got in my ear. I think it sort of developed an early appreciation for, well, if not lyrical structure, then at least cadence and meter, maybe.
Well, I tell you what, if you're only going to have, limited exposure to poetry growing up, King James Bible, not a bad place to start, huh?
It's not the worst, as long as you don't let them riff on it too much.
So you would have this kind of intervening years where you played metal and some more hardcore stuff, but where you really start to kind of jump into the stream of reality that you're still in now is you've moved up to Memphis. I guess my understanding is you're bartending at the famous Peabody Hotel, and you start to get back into roots music again, and you start playing open mics in Memphis and kind of getting together the songs and the sound that we all know now as Cory Branan. Can you kind of describe what it was like to start playing music in Memphis, and who else was around, and what the scene was like, and what you were learning at the time?
Yeah, sure. It was sort of late 90s, and I'd played guitar since I was 13, but I was just a guitarist. I never sang. I was terrified of my voice. Anytime I used to try or whatever, that folks would be like, "Go out in the yard." Go do that in the yard.
Yeah.
Um, but but I started, getting out of my shell a little bit by bartending. I was pretty shy, and so I started doing open mics. Yeah. So yeah, around that time, I became buddies with the Lucero guys. They had just started their thing. Ben had moved from Little Rock to Memphis, and but as far as there was a little scene happening, and it all centered around a club called the High Tone in Memphis. And one guy was pretty much kind of like any sort of relatively small town, and Memphis is a much smaller town than most people probably picture. You need somebody with a little bit of vision to curate the music that's coming through. Because it's going to always go lowest common denominator if you're just going to sell the beer. It's always going to eventually you're going to be back down to cover bar band, because that's what people want, and that's fine. I like to go have a Miller Lite and hear somebody cover Steve Miller. I don't know, but not really. I'm not a big Steve Miller fan, but
I get your point. Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, there was a guy, and he was he would have like eccentric things come through, metal and things, but he was doing a lot of songwriter stuff, and he was doing a lot of the all country thing was sort of happening, but he would have my brain is just not working this early, but it was a good time for that particular thing. And Memphis is a very splintered, fractured scene that I was lucky to grow up in, because people don't really care about music. It's one of those weird, perverse kind of towns where there's a legacy of music that maybe, I don't know if it makes people jaded or if whatever, but music is an afterthought in a lot of times. It's maybe it's just taken for granted. There's a lot of talent here and not a lot of appreciation, not a lot of thirst for new music. And so to play to a Memphis crowd that's just there basically to hang and see their friends, you have to learn how to throw a right hook, and then how to finesse them once you got them. You have to learn how to work a crowd. And so I always feel really lucky, especially when I go to Europe or when I go to Canada or any place where they start off with this respect. This is like, or at least the modicum of, I paid to get into this show, I should probably listen to it. Right. Any town, which is most places now, because I play songwriter rooms, and even when I play the punk rock joints, people know what they're getting,
Right.
They know my thing. And so when you don't have to wrestle them to the ground first, you got a lot of room, but working a room and stuff like that. It's also, because I want to play for people. I don't want to play for fans of mine. I obviously want to play for fans of mine, but I want to play for folks. I want to be able to go and, open up shows that are very different genres or whatever that I'm from. And so, you have to learn how to play a room and to feel the pace of a set and know what you're doing, as far as how is this functioning? When you're doing an opening slot, I get to go out and open up for rock bands and punk bands or whatever. But sometimes I open up, for like Isbel or whatever. So you're in a big room, and you have to know how to paint with a roller brush instead of a fine brush. And you also have to know that your slot is a hype man slot. You're there to get the show going, and it's like, and when you're opening up a show for people that if it's a crowd that doesn't know you as well, and they try to give you a 50-minute set, be like, do you mind if I do a 35-minute set? You can do more damage and make more of an impression by hitting it and quitting it. And just hammer it really hard. You'll do your hype man thing. You'll make you'll do your function, and you'll leave more of an impression than doing those extra 15 minutes. I swear to God, it's only 3 songs, sometimes only 4 songs. You cut those, bam. That kind of stuff is just, you just learn over years of doing it.
I couldn't agree more. I'm always amazed when people who are opening a show, they'll be like, can I play a little bit longer? Because in my mind, I'm just like, listen, audiences, particularly when you're just playing yourself in an acoustic guitar, but if an audience hasn't heard your work before, they cap out at about 20, 25 minutes of new songs. They just can't do more than that. Yeah. And so if you play for 50 minutes, Man, I'm sorry. You could be freaking Joni Mitchell in 1974, and people are they're gonna check out after 25 minutes.
That's true. That's good. And there's just a window with the, I mean, even me, like, I'm sitting here in my piano or whatever. Something I found, because I will play, because tend to be obsessive. When I do a thing, I do that thing. And so I'll play for 9 hours a day sometimes, guitar, piano, whatever. I find if I do it for longer than 25 minutes or like that, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I am starting to immediately get diminishing returns, unless it's a technical thing, and then you can just, just muscle memory. But if I'm having to use my brain if I'm saying I'm working on, a voicing a certain, C minor 11, sharp 11, whatever, and I'm working that voicing or whatever. If I'm having to think for 20 plus minutes, if I don't stand up and take a break or whatever, I'm just sitting here wasting my time. The brain can only take so much, and so that's all these things are there's a reason why certain things have fallen into use. There's a reason why there's an intermission in a 3-act play.
Yeah,
you got to give people a break, especially if you're in a situation where they don't know your music.
Especially that. And I think it's interesting, you mentioned earlier also, like, having to use the analogy of like having to wrestle an audience to the ground. And I remember doing something similar. I got my start in Chicago, and I kind of had the choice of being able to play the more singer-songwriter rooms where people were seated, or the more rock and roll rooms. And I always remember wanting to play the rock and roll rooms, because I'm like, I feel like if I can play the rock and roll rooms, there's no problem playing the singer-songwriters places.
Absolutely.
But not vice versa. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, just with an acoustic guitar, if you can keep people who are standing up, that's the whole difference. Man, people standing up, if you can keep their attention for 20 or 25 minutes, you have something that you can then sell all around the world, because that's it's a skill, man.
Yeah. It's a thing. And the main part of it is, for me anyway, is just being, it's not thinking for me. I can't, because if I start to think, I'm fucked. But it is, I have to sort of feel, just intuit the night. I have to sort of feel the room. I have to sort of, and so that's why, things like a sound system stuff can kind of be a bummer when you get in a place where you don't know what they're hearing. Yes. That's my nightmare. And so a lot of times, if it's really bad and I'm playing a certain size room, a lot of times I'll pull the mic and come in front of the monitors. I'll come down on the floor, and it depends. You can't do that after a certain size crowd. It gets a little self-indulgent, but you got to connect. And so to actually connect, you can tell, when you're there and you drop a little quick joke and you got a line after it. If somebody's laughing before you get to that next line in the back, then it's like, okay, they can hear me clearly. They can hear, because I tend to enunciate really well, even though I'm a marble mouth in real life. I've sort of developed a singing thing when I'm rather clear on stage. And so if the jokes aren't landing, I'm either in Germany or they can't hear me,
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. There's, it's funny. You do kind of develop that sixth sense, and it can work in the opposite way too, where you get on stage and you'll finish song one and people start clapping in a way where you're like, well, that was a pretty good version of that song. But I think what is happening right now is there's a really good sound engineer that has me jacked in the house right now. You know what I mean? Like, just jacked it. And there's other times where I'll finish it and you get the golf applause, and you're like, you know what, man? Either you guys haven't had enough to drink, or I'm just simply not loud enough in this room. I don't know if you've ever run into this before, but I'm seriously considering traveling with my own sound engineer right now. But what kills me is you're going to have to pay him $300 or $400 a day just to sit there and push the gain fader up, 6 dB every night.
Yeah, but just add some cojones. You're basically paying for some cojones.
You're paying for some cojones. But
it's like, just have I don't know what it is about. Usually when I'm working with a sound guy, that I don't know, because I play, I tend to play circuit. You probably play the same clubs a lot, and so I know folks now, and they know what I like. But when I'm working with a new person, I come in and I give them the best thing I can get. I mean, my guitar, through all the years of trial and error, I've found a system that can make it sound like my guitar. All I've got is I got a spliced thing. I've got just a K and K or whatever, and then but it's also spliced to a DPA mic, that like a lavalier, like an interview mic. And I've got that just at the sound hole, towards the strings or whatever. And so then I go through a Grace preamp and I cut all the low out of that mic, all the feedback low, and then I use that for the sparkle, and I use the K and K for the low end, and I've got parametric mids or whatever on the thing. And so I have the ability right there on the preamp to control the top and the bottom immediately. I can shelve or add, and that's usually your problems and your variables as far as a room goes. If you have problems in a room with the mids, it's monitors and it's outside of your control. And so I come armed, but usually when I'm talking to him mixing, I'm not like a strummy singer songwriter. I'm like, this is my band, this is my right arm. This is my drummer, my thumb is my bass player, I'm like this guitar sort of, if you can get it up, rock and roll. And so I usually, I'll check with a finger picker thing, whatever, but I'm like, to make sure they get headroom, I'll play Pinball Wizard or something. I'm like, this is what I want. I want, when I go like this up here, I want that bass to do something, and so if you tell them what you want, usually they're fine and they'll work with you, but you just have to be clear and, just make sure you have the headroom, and also don't go 100% in the sound check. Always go 85, 90% or whatever, save a little bit,
Yes, no, definitely.
And that way you're going to be a little bit louder than they were going to let you be.
But, at the end of the day, though, it always comes down to, in the same way that whether a guitar sounds good or not, ultimately comes down to the guitar player's right hand. The same thing with someone behind the board. It's like you can send them this amazing signal and you can tell them exactly what you want. But if the person lacks just basic knowledge, like there's just no way. Like if you're back there and you can hear them, you start strumming and playing, and all of a sudden they just start just very violently sweeping with the EQ through the you're like, oh man, we're in trouble here. There's nothing you can do.
There's so many times, I don't know, a lot of things, I think is for a working songwriter, back to the title, I think it's important to realize that a lot of the clubs are not set up for you.
Yes,
they're not, the monitors, if they probably have compressing on them. And then the top's probably gone and the bottom's probably gone. They're probably EQ'd for a singer's, 57 to cut through a band mix a lot of times. And so, you can it's basically if somebody's, maybe they're just new to that room or whatever, or they're filling in, be like, can you take, whatever, now that they just have scenes and stuff, I'm like, can you take anything off of these, just run them flat, and things like that. But yeah, and a lot of people also don't know where you're coming from. If you have a certain style, if you're going to be playing in some open tunings and things like this, where you're where the low end is going to be really important. A lot of people aren't used to an acoustic thing where the low end is going to be really important. And just, it's just be as clear as you can. But yeah. At the end of the night, you're at the mercy of other people. But who isn't in life?
Who isn't, man? Very few people. Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet.
The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Even after Cory's initial success, he followed his own internal creative voice. Rather than trying to chase the dragon of what worked for him before, or chasing after what he believes his audience will want, he continues to seek what is most pleasing to his own aesthetic sensibility. And there's a poem about putting your attention in a correct and well-ordered place, as Cory has. It's by Joseph Mills, and it's entitled Turning. My friend's kid runs the sideline, gets a pass, turns, and scores with a kick to the near post. It's how the play should go, but at this age rarely does. My son sprints to him, arms up. They high-five and celebrate a moment, then turn to jog back to their positions. Last year, they would have hopped around madly, twirled, fallen backwards, and rolled in the grass. This season, they are serious. No more skipping. No more acting sweetly goofy. Now, they turn towards one another rather than toward us. No more checking that we've seen, but we have. We know the score and what's lost as they try to turn themselves into men.
Talk to me a bit about you're doing those open mics in Memphis, and then just a few years later, you're on the national scene and you're playing David Letterman. You've become a songwriter that people who love songwriters across America know. How did you go from playing locally in Memphis to where you are now? What was the kind of break that you got to get you through there?
It was just blind luck. It was actually one person, I think. I had a publicist from the get-go, that came on, and she, this was a time when a publicist could do something for you. Again, pre-digital fracturing, the blip. And she came on. I don't even know how she found the music, but she used to manage Sparkle Horse and Ween and stuff. So she would do oddball stuff, but she also did like Ben Harper, and she broke Jack Johnson, for better or worse. And so she did a lot of stuff. And she sort of just took it on. And so I started off with that first record. That's why it came out in Memphis, and then it came out nationally a little bit later. So it was like a year later. So that's what happened. She picked it up, and we changed a couple songs. I don't even remember why, because it's not like there's a big change. Dropped a couple and put something else on, and it came out nationally. And then so basically she just got me pop press, and she did it like the business did it. She would be like, oh, okay, well, if you want who was it? She had Moby or whatever. She used to represent Moby. She'd be like, hey, if you want Moby to come on, or you want an interview with Moby, throw my fucking nobody a bone here, And so, I'm coming out of the gates with like a full page in Rolling Stone kind of thing, And it's it was inappropriate pop press, and it was fun. I was like, I knew it was inappropriate, because I didn't have a tour, for fuck's sake. I didn't have anything. It's basically a 2-man label. And I had no manager or any of that shit. And I had no experience touring outside of like, Southeast maybe. And it was just like hitting shows here and there. I was green as hell as far as that goes. And I enjoyed it. It was fun, but I knew at the time it was inappropriate. I was just like, this is too big a press for where I'm at. And and I'm like, well, we'll ride it and see what happens. And I think in the long run, it actually kind of bit me because I think a lot of people were like, oh, this artist had a shot and he didn't do anything with it. I think a lot of that,
well, but at least, but right after that happened, as you mentioned, press stopped meaning anything basically. So at least you got in before the curtain came down.
It was nice to have a last little run. I wish I'd gotten into record sales before Napster, but
so
I was kind of simultaneous with that. But yeah, I got back in when I used to go. There was a time when I would walk into fucking a Kroger, and there would be 3 magazines with me in it. And I was just like, I was from Mississippi, and I was just like, this is insanity. I'm like, there's the Flaunt magazine, and there's like fucking GQ and whatever. And I'm in that one. And it's like, I was just like losing my mind. I was like, this is insane. And so I just had fun with it. I didn't take any of it to heart. And then, when it went away, I've always had good press. Like when I've been lucky is because I think for the most part in general, music critics are writers or failed writers or they're writers. And so, your music and my music, it's lyric driven. Mm-hmm. And so I think people respond to that. So I've always been good with press when they cover it. And so now it's gotten, there's been a sea change. I don't know if you've noticed, even since this new record, even since my last one, which was like 4 years ago, whatever, 5 years, mm-hmm. I had a gap there, but things have changed to where no one is touching anything below a certain level. Yeah. So you either have to, the coverage of the old guard on this record, I've had every album I've ever had has been, either pitchforked or, or Rolling Stone or all these things. And all, they've always been kind and covered them. No one touched it as far as the old guard. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm like, should I be taking this personal? And everyone I've talked to across the board are like, nope. It's like, they're not bothering. And so they either want to break you, you got to be a completely new act. Mm-hmm. And I get that my music is not, it's not cutting edge. It's not, I'm not relevant to a 14-year-old. I've never tried to be. Right. And so I get that my thing is a niche thing, but there was always even just 4 years ago, there was Rolling Stone Country. There was a niche, they had these things, they had a certain person at Pitchfork that covered, I think all those magazines even passed like on the last Drive By Truckers and things like that. I'm talking even artists that are in our vein or whatever that are really, at a certain tier. I think they didn't even touch that. It's like there's just a thing where they have the old guard where they know that will bring those old guard fans to the magazine. Or they have the idea where they have to break someone, which is fine. That's great. So they're really on the next thing. What's the next thing? So yeah, I don't know. It's all changing.
Yeah, it is. But I think the way that it's changed, it's even more fundamental of what you're talking about. It's like, sure, maybe they're not touching it. But my question would be at this point, if they did touch it and they gave it the most glowing review possible, what would it really change? Like
nothing.
What piece of press? Because I think about it this way. Because obviously, this day and age, we're both running a business. You got to pay for a publicist to help you out with this stuff. And it's like, okay, so for me, if I'm going to pay for that, I'm going to go on a tour afterwards. How many more tickets am I selling on this tour because of this piece of press? And I look around and it's like, I don't see any piece of press that takes my, that sells me 150 tickets in a market because it's a big deal. None of it. You know what I mean? None of it sells out the show. Like, whereas 10 or 15 years ago, you get the right Pitchfork review, you get the right New York Times Magazine feature, your tour sells out like that.
If you, If you had the idea was the blitzkrieg it. You drop the record and you have the radio set up at the same time. And even then, people are, even when there were less at you from every pore in the earth, information coming up, even when there was less, it was still too much. And so you to make a dent, you had to have it all at the same time. So you'd have to have the radio thing, you'd be pushing it, and you'd whatever, and the circuit would have to work. You'd have to have the tour with the thing. But over the years, I've just found that, the press doesn't do a lot. Even like the Letterman thing, it didn't, and a lot of people watched it. When you get the numbers back or whatever, and you see the thing, I'm like, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
But it opens up expectations. I think the use of it is, and it's just, I get more use out of the blurb pull quotes from, Billboard or whatever. You put those pull quotes on a tour poster. A quote from Rolling Stone doesn't mean shit to people that know what it is now, to know that they know what digital sort of thing that stuff is. But when you're playing Des Moines on a Tuesday, a quote from Rolling Stone has a little more pull on the poster on the wall. There are ways to use those things functionally. But yes, the press is not really a thing. Tour press is different though. The local rag, when you get somebody if you can get somebody working that has a relationship on a circuit that can hit up the person that's writing for the local rag and just let them know this is coming in a couple months, and if you end up on we recommend of a local, if you're in Memphis and you get it in the Memphis Flyer and you're on the we recommend, that actually makes a difference. That'll draw people because they're just, they're like, oh, what am I going to do tonight? That'll draw some people that aren't normally going to be there. And so, that's where I would focus. If again, I'm talking like that people that are listening are in the business and they're out there trying to tread water like we do.
Many of them are, and those who aren't, they already tuned out 15 minutes ago. So it's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say focus on the tour press over, your dream spread in Vanity Fair.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about this. You do have a new record that just came out the very end of last year. It's brand new. When I Go, I Ghost. Talk to me a little bit about how did you put this record together? And because you mentioned you had that little break between this and the one before. What were you doing in that interim, and how is this album different than the ones you put out in the past?
Yeah, sure. I had to, even I was getting ready before COVID happened. I had all this stuff demoed out. I had written like 50 songs that year, and I had old ones, and I just had a sort of a big batch. And then all that happened, obviously, and so I had to shift gears. And so I got kids, so I had to keep some money coming in, and so I shifted gears to I learned how to record and mix and master here at the house, and so I put out like 5 cover records direct to fans. Like you'll never hear them on Spotify or anything like that. So I would just take these, people would request tunes and commission tunes basically, and then I would put those on records. So it was everything from stuff that made sense, like Replacements and Springsteen, to like Peaches, Fuck the Pain Away. So I'm learning how to program beats and shit. But it was great. It was fun. So that was my full panic mode. I have to keep working. And so, so everything sort of went on hold for a couple of years. And so then I was lucky enough where I had gone in before COVID, and I went in with Matt Rothspang over at Sam Phillips' studio. This is before Matt's got his own amazing place there at Crosstown. And just knocked out some demos, went in and just threw up a microphone and demoed about 25 or so. And from those demos, Blue Alon came along and they offered me a deal. And because, Bloodshot had gone away, and I folded, and they came along, and they were kind, and they were generous. And so I went in and did the record, I guess a year ago, and went in Nashville with Jeremy Ferguson over at Battle Tapes, and did the record. Had great musicians, Rob Crowell, and Eric Slick from Dr. Dogs on the drums, and
Yeah. Yeah.
had all just all these great players, and then did like I always do. I always get my friends to guest sing. I've done it since the first record. I just eventually I would love to write myself out of my records. I would love to just cast everyone like it's a play,
Yeah.
Be like, because
Yeah.
I hear, I can, every time I write a song, I'm just like, oh, so and so would sing this much better than I do. I think maybe I missed my calling. I should have been born around Tin Pan Alley era. I think I would like to be a songwriter for other people.
Yeah.
But when I say other people, I don't mean like songwriter for lowest common denominator,
Right.
Radio country, which is the only real way you can make a living as a songwriter these days. But anyway, so yeah, I've got guests from like Garrison Starr and Jason Isbell and Brian Fallon from Gaslight Anthem, and just all kind of folks. And yeah, we just had fun. It was like the easiest record I've ever made. Sometimes it's sweat and blood making these things. Sometimes I don't know how you are in studio, but I there's aspects of it that give me panic attacks. It's like some of it's just too much. It's like you're hurting. I don't know, but
no, I know I used to feel like that a lot, but I don't know. My last couple, I've really felt like the recording process has been like, it's like my treat for all the other stuff I got to do to stay in the business. There's a lot of stuff you got to do to stay in the business. It's crazy,
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you have kids. You got to be on the road and away from them a lot, and it can feel difficult and taxing. But it does feel like in this day and age, like a total privilege to have the capital and the ability and the resources with personnel to make a record. So for me, the last couple have just been like we'll finish, however many days tracking. I don't track for long, 5 or 6 days. When we finish it, I'm like, can we just do that again? Like that was nice. That was a treat for me right there.
That's how this was. This is the first for me though, because that was the first. Tracking's always fun because I'm the same way. I don't track for long. Mm-hmm. I like to cut. I don't do nothing on my records more than 3 takes. Kind of thing. And but before it's been arduous. This time was just the rails were greased, man. It was so easy, so much. And again, it might have been that thing. It might have just been the feeling so fortunate to be working again after how uncertain everything was. That sort of, at least being like, oh, I have a modicum of control in my life. That's all I need is just, I don't even need to choose where we're going. Just give me a steering wheel. It's like, instead of letting me careen down the side of a mountain in a cardboard box, I'm just like, just let me, and so I'm like, I can control these things. And you get it was so nice it's always great to play with musicians when you get that thing, because I don't really give people the demos a whole lot ahead of time. I like that interaction of immediate, even though my songs are kind of snaky and I probably should, I don't like a really laid out thing. Yep. Now the demos that I give them are arranged to the hilt. Because that's how I finish a song. My idea of the song's not finished until I can hear. I know what the music, the break should feel like. In the middle, I know where the middle 8 should go. I know how to structure a song, and so I give it to them like that. And I put all the work I can do in it, and then I get people that are more talented than me, and then I listen. And we feel it out. And like when something is better, which everything Eric Slick touched, every sort of rhythm I had in mind, he played something more interesting immediately, and I was like, "Yep, that's where that goes." And then he's so modest for such a great drummer. He's so modest that he didn't care about, which is always a good sign with a musician. He didn't care about playing something fucking boring. Like if I asked him to, I was like, this song. I have a song on there that's on the waterfront, and I'm like, man, I'm really picturing this as a late night lost 80s song to where it's like a figure beat almost. I'm like, just as fucking straight as you can do it. And he's like, psh, and he started doing it. I was like, that's it. And he's just like, Isaac's like, oh, and he's just back there, just really sort of grooving to this straight, down on Main Street. night moves kind of beat, which is it what's what the song needed, and he was great to play it, but then he was everything else was really creative and all over the place, and I enjoy that conversation with musicians, that sort of that non-conversation. Yeah.
So basically, you were asking him in that moment to be the AC/DC drummer. This guitar player I used to play with, he blew my mind one time. He referred to the AC/DC drummer and he said, well, he doesn't play any fills, right? And I was like, what did you say? He's like, he'll hit a cymbal every now and then, but the drummer from AC/DC doesn't play any fills. And now, if you go back and listen, going forward, Cory, next time you hear AC/DC, listen for fills in the drums. There's none.
Oh yeah, no. Or they're on the 1 and 3,
Yeah. But it's like
doubled, floor tom, but it's not a fill. Yeah.
No,
that's the AC/DC formula. They figured out, frankly, it's the Chuck Berry formula. It's the rock and roll formula. They're doing 3 against 4. It's the only syncopation we get in the Western world. But all of AC/DC is 1, 2, 3, 4. But against that is a triple, which is all Chuck Berry was da 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 1, 2, 3. But with the piano going da 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 da, and his guitar, was doing the 3 against 4. But all the AC/DC, da 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 da. That's all syncopated.
Yep.
And that's that they figured out. They're like, oh, well, if we have this power drum on this thing, we can't dance against it.
Yes.
Like this, we can fucking rock and roll. Like, it's like a Tenacious D all of a sudden. But yeah, they're just like, okay, let's just completely take away everything extraneous and let's do the 3 against 4. It's like, yeah, you guys figured it out. You don't need to change. I don't ever want to hear them branch out. Like, you guys keep fucking being AC/DC.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they're so good at it.
There's so many artists like chafe against it after 15, 20 years. And, it's like, I want to be me. The audience won't let me be me. And here is AC/DC 40 or 50 years later. And they're like, this is great. We're just going to keep on doing this. We don't mind.
Because they arrived fully formed. They can't get any more AC/DC than AC/DC started out. And they're like, let's just do this. Because it's awesome.
Well, man, congrats on the new record. Thanks for stopping by the show to chat. This was great. And
yeah, man. Thanks for letting me babble.
Absolutely. All right, man. I'll talk to you.
I appreciate you, brother. All the best.
Thank you. Same. Peace.
Cheers. Cheers, Joe.
This week's show was brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Cory Branan's latest album is entitled When I Go, I Ghost, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.